Filming with anamorphic lenses is becoming more and more popular. Greyjoy is a brand that is rather new in the film world, but is currently building a lineup of affordable anamorphic glass. The 35mm T2.9 has an image circle of 33 by 24mm for 4:3 full-frame shooting and a squeeze ratio of 1.8 times. Greyjoy has already released a 50mm version of this lens, which we have also tested. Optically they perform very similar, and the overall look of the image matches with both lenses. While most anamorphic lenses are known for their extreme blue lens flares, the Greyjoy 35mm T2.9 has a rather subtle warm flare that is less noticeable than on the 50mm T2.9 lens. Nonetheless, the flare is very complex with horizontal and vertical elements that can be seen when filming directly into a light source. But in most normal shots, the lens flare won't be visible. While we are mostly using this lens on APS-C cameras, which results in a 1.5 times crop and a less wide field of view, the anamorphic characteristics are still very prominent. The minimum focusing distance is 70 cm, which isn't very close but good for an anamorphic wide-angle lens. Lens breathing isn't all too noticeable in most shots. Wide open at a t-stop of 2.9, the image is a bit soft, especially in the corners. The contrast is also rather flat. At t5.6, the image cleans up nicely with more detail and improved contrast. Unsurprisingly, the lens performs optically best at t8 with better sharpness and detail across the image. At T2.9, I wouldn't recommend filming at infinity since the center sharpness isn't always on point. But also keep in mind that optical perfection is never reached with any kind of anamorphic lens, even with an expensive one. The whole point of using a lens like this is to get a rather organic and less digital look that most spherical photo lenses produce these days. As to expect from a 1.8 times squeeze ratio, the out of focus areas have a unique characteristic. The bokeh isn't as noticeable as with a 50mm T2.9 lens, since the 35mm is of course much wider. Nonetheless, the look is probably as organic and filmic as to what a digital camera can capture. Pulling focus is smooth and even works better with a pre-production unit than with a previous 50mm lens. The rotation is 246 degrees, which means it will be the easiest to use a follow focus instead of pulling focus with just one hand. On the left side of the lens are the markings in meters and on the right side in feet. The only thing that doesn't seem to be precise on our sample unit is the focus markings and the actual distance. For example, infinity is already reached when setting the focus ring to 10 meters. But this is probably just the case because this isn't a finished version of the lens. But since these lenses aren't designed to give a sharp digital look, it makes sense to double check focus anyway, either by using a large external monitor or by turning on focus peaking. While the manufacturer claims a constant squeeze ratio of 1.8 times, there is a slight shift noticeable when pulling focus, but nothing out of the ordinary. The aperture ring goes from T2.9 to T22 and can be rotated 99 degrees. Just like with most of these affordable anamorphic lenses, there is a slight clicking sound audible when hitting one end of the focus or aperture ring. On the bottom of the lens is a 1/4 inch screw adapter for a lens support system, which I highly recommend using since the lens weighs almost 1.2 kilos. While this is lightweight for an anamorphic full-frame lens, most camera mounts won't be able to handle such weight. The build quality of the lens is solid, just like the 50mm version. In fact, it's hard to tell them apart since the housing is pretty much the same. The 35mm housing is a bit longer though, but hardly noticeable. The lens will be available for a handful of mounts, even micro four thirds. The lens has an 82mm front filter thread that can be used to mount circular filters. The 35mm T2.9 is a solid addition to the 50mm T2.9, which already performed well both optically and physically. The major difference between these two is the lens flare, but maybe Greyjoy will offer different types of flares in the future. There aren't many affordable anamorphic lenses with a 1.8x grease ratio out there, so these two are a good way to start shooting anamorphic.